Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Konstantin Korn, Halil Han Aktaş, Andreas Hinz, and Abdellatif Atif will talk about democratic schools.
Imagine a school where everyone can decide what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, how to learn, with whom to learn. That's very close to the definition of democratic education of the European democratic education community. And these schools exist, and these schools are successful. They have no classes, they have no grades, they have not a fixed timetable, they have no fixed curricula, they have no fixed subjects, but they have a space for activities. They have lots of ateliers, maybe for music, for art, for theater, for languages. And students have the chance to be subjects of learning instead of objects of teaching. To say it with a German psychologist, it's not, or it's going away from the defensive mode of learning where you primarily react on impulses of others, and it's going to an expansive mode of learning where you can go into the deep or into wideness as far as you want. So you are responsible for your own learning and you get support by others. Some time ago I saw a video from the famous jazz bass player Avishai Cohen and his new trio. And there was a young lady sitting at the drums. Her name is Ronnie Caspi. And immediately I thought she must have been on a democratic school, because how she played drums was so fascinating, so complicated, so virtuoso. And it was true. She was a student of a democratic school, and later she went somewhere else and went on learning drumming for many years. Maybe this picture could be a dream school, or it also could be a nightmare school. It's depending on your perspective. There is one big question: what does democratic school mean in general? And I would like to follow Jakob Hecht, one of the international pioneers for democratic education. And he says every democratic school, of course, is different. And if there are two which are the same, one of them stopped thinking. But there are four basic principles. And I will give you an overview now about these four principles. And later there will be some specifications about that. The first principle is dialogic relations, and that's the base of everything. In this school, there are practices of a partnership culture instead of a domination culture. There are no people who tell others what to do, how to do it, and instead of that, there is a culture of talking eye to eye on the same eye to eye level. So they try to reduce or to eliminate adultistic tendencies. They practice how Martin Buber said it, Ich-Du-Beziehung, me-you relationship. And there is a holistic view on the whole person of the student. And it's not just focused on some mathematics problems. It's about the whole person and the person, how the person thinks that who he or she is. I would say the heart of these dialogic relations is mentoring. And every child chooses a mentor, sometimes in some schools for a year, in some schools for half a year. And it is not the task of the mentor to say what the child should do or how it should behave or anything like that, but to think together with the child who the child is And if maybe there are some unconscious backstages, a term by Goffman, which are bringing the child to some decisions and the child doesn't know about that. And the task of the mentor is to question some situations in respect to the child, and of course the child still has the decision. So it's not about taking away the decision or taking away power of the child. And that's a task which is quite challenging, especially for pedagogues, because many of them are used to take over something and to guide children and to teach them something. So that's dialogic relations with the mentoring as the heart of the whole thing. The second one is personalized learning. And personalized learning doesn't mean that every person, every student, every child gets a program for individual work for the next month or so, but it's based on a balance of individual freedom on one hand and a common social space on the other hand. And there's a lot of space for collaboration with others. So this is a combination, or the idea is a connected combination of collective learning and individual learning based on the free will of everyone. And for example, it could be that there is a 15-year-old boy who is very much interested in black holes, and maybe there is an 8-year-old girl who hears about that and says, oh, that's also interesting for me. And maybe there is someone 17 years old who's also joining the group. So there is a constant change of individual and common cooperative situations. And that's what personalized learning means. The third principle is building a democratic community. And I would say almost every democratic school has a school assembly, and it works after the principle one person, one vote. Often they quote the ANC, one man, one vote, but today one man is not so accurate. So it's about one person, one vote. And the school assembly takes every important decision connected to the school. And before the decision making, there will be a lot of dialogue or maybe controversial discussion in diversity with different perspectives, different meanings. And one thing is very clear, the majority in the school assembly are students. And that's changing power structures. The school assembly is supported by some committees. There are different names for committees, and there are a lot of different committees. Maybe a financial committee, maybe a committee for journeys, maybe a committee about juridical questions, maybe a committee about staff, and maybe some others. And in all these committees, there are children, and they are supported by adults as facilitators. But the role of adults is to make sure that everyone understands what's going on, and it's not about taking over power of some children. For example, I remember one example that someone who was very interested in the finances of a school learned a lot in mathematics about that. And it was not the exercise mode we know from many state schools, just do some mathematical techniques, but it was really connected to the life of the school and so with the life of the students. And it was a wonderful opportunity to learn so much about mathematics. And in the committee about staff, of course, there's the question of hire and fire people. And when I visited some democratic schools for the first time, I always asked, is it true that students could decide about hiring and firing of adults? And they said yes. of course. And I asked, did it happen? And every time they said, no. Because if there is an adult who offers something and nobody chooses it, this adult will start to think about what's going wrong. And there is no need for fire someone. Yeah, another aspect of this building democratic community, there is no fixed timetable. Every child is deciding about his, her own time, is deciding how many lessons per week he or she wants to take, which lesson he or she wants to have. And of course, connected to that, there is a big question about patience of parents. How long are they able and willing to wait until, for example, a child starts with mathematics? And there is one aspect which is really important, boring time. I remember a conference where students from democratic schools told about, it was always interesting, there were always offerings. And then a former student of a democratic school said, something went wrong. If you never had boring time, you never had the chance to find out what's really important for you and what's really interesting for you. You need boring time. Not in the sense we know from state schools. Tuesday at 10:30 I have to be interested in biology and I'm not. That's boring. That's not what I'm talking about. Boring time is a time where you don't know how to find out, or where you start to find out what's really important for you. And the fourth basic principle is the content is based on human rights, and especially children's rights. And there are three aspects about that. One is about learning about human rights with information and knowledge. A second is what is the meaning of human rights for learning processes, how to learn human rights. And the third one is about attitudes and actions. And that could be a tricky one, because it could be a starting point for taking influence by adults. You have to do something for human rights. And of course, that would be dangerous. The content based on human rights is, of course, is connected with anti-discrimination and inclusion. And it's no coincidence that a lot of democratic schools are part of social movements for peace, for reasonable living rooms, for ecology, for a better future, and so on, and so on, and so on. Not only on Fridays. Yeah, and the last point in that principle is there is a big need for the reflection of power relations, because there's always a big difference between principles and realities of societies, and of course democratic schools are part of the society. So it's important to think about again and again, what can we decide by ourselves and what are the topics others have already decided before us. I would like to add a last point about the connection between democratic schools and inclusive education or inclusion. And from my point of view, they are highly linked. Both are based on children's rights. Both are radical approaches, and with that they are not mainstream, even if the rhetoric is very mainstream looking. Both are against marginalization and othering and against discrimination. Both value the beauty of diversity. Both build on participation, and both try to make students or keep students as subjects of learning. Democratic education without inclusion stays selective. Inclusion without democracy stays hierarchical. So one without the other is not really democratic and not really inclusive. So from my point of view, they are undividedly linked.
Why do we need democratic schools now? The answer might seem theoretical, but it speaks about concrete difficulties with both democracy and education find themselves. We believe that democratic schools have the potential to keep the democratic and educational projects alive and vivid. Concerning the crisis of democracy, political debates seem to be replaced by market calculations. This is how, unfortunately, it became widely believed that political contestations are useless and that we should focus on practical and financial matters. Concerning the crisis of schools, what happens is that right-wing and conservative movements are using the same market logic to convince us that political and emancipatory projects should be abandoned. By this, these movements hijack the injustice of the status quo by a discourse that claims political neutrality. So we believe that focusing on skills or competencies is not bad by itself, but we also think that avoiding political debates is neither good for democracy nor for schools. As Andreas presented before, democratic schools are perfect format for democracy. They are organized around the principle of debate and freedom. Students have the right to choose what and how they want to learn. And for democratic purposes, they are even encouraged to think about their needs and to articulate the demands of their communities. Now the question becomes, how does this happen realistically?
So until this moment, our group mates introduced the topic to be discussed for this session, and I will delve into the points that Andreas shared with us. I will be detailing how to function in a democratic school, or let's say how a democratic school functions. I will detail these issues. I will start with the dialogical relationships in democratic schools and how to build them. And when we say dialogic relationships, generally we talk about at least two sides that come together and starts to discuss something. And in this case, when we talk about schools, we should start by accepting the students as natural members of school communities. And by this way, we need to start giving some communication and respect to these people who are attending in the school life. And to be able to realize this issue, we need to be giving, or let's say creating a space that values, listens to the opinions of all. We need to create learning environments that include such aspects. And to transform the schools into institutions or structures that realize that issue, we need to create mechanisms that supports collective decision-making processes. I would love to give an example about this issue. We may give sociocratic circles as an example for this aspect. They can be described as semi-autonomous voluntary decision-making groups. Try to imagine that there are a group of students who come together voluntarily after deciding that there is a problematic issue in the school, and they come together to discuss these problems. To describe this part more clearly, I would like to give an example from my own research in Turkey. I collected my data from a democratic school. In this school, adults thought that it might be better for children to have experiences in environments like school councils. So they provided the school with a hall in which students come together weekly to discuss about the problems regarding the school. But after a while, these elementary school children thought that it was so frequent to meet weekly. And they thought it was sometimes boring to go there without other issues, without other activities, just going there and discussing some topics. So they started a sociocratic circle regarding the school council. So they started to discuss this issue, saying that maybe we could turn it into something less frequent. Or let's say, maybe we could start these school councils by playing some games. And they discussed these topics and determined the, let's say, some evolving versions of school council. And they presented their ideas into the school council. They presented it to their friends or other adults in the school setting, and they said, yeah, let's try something different. Let's try these school councils in 2 weeks instead of each week, and let's start these councils with games. Let's start it with coming together, enjoying the time there, and then discuss the issues. And they tried it, and they liked it. And this was a moment of their having a chance to change their school environment by taking their ideas into consideration. So it was an interesting example for me, because I, for the first time, as an educational researcher, I for the first time saw that there was a case in which students could decide to change the school environment, the school activities, which was nice for me. And to be able to open such a space in democratic schools, we should be able to regard that there are dialectical thinking, which is a must in democratic schools. What I mean by this is that when we talk about schools, there are generally a community inside these schools, which include different types of beliefs, different types of interests, different types of needs, and different types of perspectives. If we strictly attach to an idea that there is somebody who will decide about the school setting, we will miss these differences. But instead of thinking this way, we may start to think dialectically, accepting that there are differences inside the communities, and we should be careful to consider these differences. Instead of avoiding conflicts, for instance, we may, let's say, prepare some comfortable spaces for children to discuss these topics openly. Instead of hiding some problems to somewhere, we can discuss them, try to solve these problems collectively. But to be able to achieve this purpose, we need to consider some aspects regarding social emotional dimensions of learning. For instance, to be able to discuss some topic openly, first of all, we need a trust between people. They can, let's say, have some respect to each other. They can, or let's say, they should be open to listen to each other. By this way, they can discuss things, they can respect each other, and they can cooperate. Also, to be able to make a discussion possible, we need some people who have some self-esteem. They should be aware of their feelings, their ideas, and they should be able to put forward these ideas to other people. And maybe we can also talk different aspects, like Andreas was talking about, for instance, learning in a joyful way. But to be able to translate the learning into a joyful, enjoyable process, we should be able to provide people with their, let's say, with chance to determine their own learning process, to plan it individually. But to be able to do so, they need the skills like goal setting, self-regulation, taking responsibility. These are what makes it possible to let children to determine their learning process. And also, when we talk about conflicts, we can imagine that there are people who are proposing to some ideas, or let's say suggesting some different ideas, or let's say defending their own positions, which means they are able to self-advocate. So such kind of social emotional dimensions are important in democratic schools. Otherwise, it will be a tokenistic right given to the students, which are assumed to be realized, but actually which are not taking place in the school settings. Maybe in this part, we may share our experiences and ideas together to make it more clear to identify the possible ways to organize learning in democratic schools. As I am somebody doing research in curriculum and instruction area, I would like to relate the concept of democracy and curriculum to each other. First of all, I would like to start with the concept of democracy. When we say democracy, actually we borrow this term from the Greek terms, let's say, because there are two, of which, first of which is demos, which means people who are living on a shared territory, and the kratos, which means to rule, to have the strength to rule. And when we bring these two concepts from, let's say, Greek etymological oops, I would like to start this part again, please. Sorry. When we bring these two concepts together, democracy means for me to something like there are some group of people who are sharing their lives together and trying to get strengthened together and trying to, let's say, develop individually as well. And when we talk about the term curriculum, actually it refers to something like that. There is a path that we need to run. And it is quite personalized in a way, because when we talk about curriculum, generally it refers to something in our minds that is prescribed, which is quite fixed. But actually we can take this term as a flexible, as a fluid, vivid thing as well. And when we bring together these two terms, democratic curriculum, I think it is something that refers that we are a community, we are living together, and by this way we are trying to improve our life conditions together by improving our personal conditions as well. So it's quite integrated to each other in my mind. And when we start to organize learning in democratic schools, I guess we first of all should start by the prior experiences of children, because we bring together these children together and we are trying to connect them to each other. And to be able to realize this, we need to be informed about their experiences, interests, and needs. And by starting from this point, we can organize learning in democratic schools, in my opinion. And also, you already mentioned about the freedom, passion, and joy for learning in democratic schools. You were saying that it might be a school that everybody wants to join, to take part inside, and this is what makes democratic schools special, or let's say something really crucial in this aspect in my mind. And in such environments, as I said, we can bring together the individual and collective good together, because by developing some social emotional objectives, we may prepare them to make cooperation, to understand each other, to respect each other. These are parts, very natural parts of democratic schools in my mind. And while organizing learning, we should be careful about these aspects. These are very main principles in my mind. So we said that when we dream about, or when we talk about democratic schools, we generally imagine a community in which people come together. And we aim to work them in a harmonious way. We are trying to support them to be a community like this. And to achieve this, I think we need to focus on different aspects of learning. I already mentioned about social emotional aspects of learning in democratic schools, but we also need to implement different types of activities to, let's say, develop their other skills as well. Because when we talk about democratic schools as a natural part of democratic societies, we generally aim to raise citizens who are able to observe their environment, analyze their environment by synthesizing their observations, maybe providing something new for their societies. So this requires something built in their minds, in their emotions, and so on and so on. And to be able to do so, I think in democratic schools, and especially in democratic curriculum, we need to give some space both for humanities and science. It's not just about emotions, it's not just about academic things. And while organizing our learning progress, I guess, we need to keep our mind maybe a mind map, or let's say a matrix of curriculum elements and their correspondence to the social and emotional aspects as well. Because when we generally observe a school setting which is not democratic, generally there is a teacher telling some, or let's say transferring some information to the students. It is generally about academic aspects. But when we think about our reactions, or let's say our interactions with our students or with children, generally what we do causes some reactions in their minds, in their emotions. So we need to be considering what our actions and what are their consequences in their minds. So we should be trying to develop this organization of learning in this aspect as well. By the way,
maybe may I add something?
Yeah, sure.
And I think it could be a specific chance for learning if it's not too harmonic.
Mm-hmm.
if we have different perspectives, if we have different opportunities, and that's also about democracy, we need also dissents. And
Yeah.
so, because I had the feeling you were talking, of course, about respect and mutual respect, and I think also dissent could be an important aspect of that.
I believe so. I would agree with this idea, but I think our responsibility regarding this issue is that we need to prepare a secure place to these events take. I mean, to let these events take place in a good way, in a, let's say, positive way. Otherwise, it might turn into something really destructive. Our responsibilities as adults in such schools to maybe try to secure this place for them to, let's say, openly discuss it without not hurting each other. There might be sometimes that they hurt each other, but it's important, or let's say it's our responsibility to consider these things in my perspective.
I agree.
Yeah, and also I would like to give let's say, make a differentiation between a democratic school and a regular school. In general, when we consider regular schools, as I said, there is a child sitting in his or let's say there are some children who are sitting on their chair all the day, listening to some adults, and so on and so on. But in this case, they are in a mood of inertia, not moving around, not experiencing the school life itself, just receiving some information. But instead of this, we may give them a chance to experience the school life, maybe the conflicts themselves. They may experience it. From these experiences, they make some lessons. So it's important to give a chance to them to experience and to participate. We can also give examples about these issues, I guess. From German perspective, maybe from German context, I saw something like Arbeitsplan or weekly plans. You were talking about the students deciding their own learning progress. We need to prepare some mechanisms which make it possible for students. Otherwise, it will be something like, yeah, you can do it yourself, you can decide on your learning, and there is no, let's say, strategies there. It might not work very well, but if we create some procedures that make some meaningful steps, then it might be open for them. A child may decide on their learning projects. Maybe you might give examples about this?
Yeah, I just would like to add that changes the role of teachers.
Yeah.
Because they are not anymore the transmitting persons, but they are connecting children together. And so that's a quite different role, and
And also it provides children to have a chance to evaluate their learning progress, because they have some empirical data there, which is quite meaningful for them. They experienced it, and when they talk with the adults about these issues, they know what they are talking about. It's there, it's quite observable, and they progress by following these steps. Also, maybe we can talk about portfolios or learning progress reports, because when children have such kind of documents with them, they may check what I learned, how I learned it, was it difficult, was it simple? They may think about these things. Otherwise, it's just a task to be completed. So it's important to give a chance for them to reflect on their learning progresses. And also,
and maybe I can add another example I experienced. It's called the black market of knowledge. And that's a good example, because the black market of knowledge was an idea of students, and they wanted to present something they worked about. And I think it's a good example, because it's also strengthening the change between or the combination between individual learning. I worked about that and I found out. And then maybe after the black market of knowledge, there are some other students joining. They build a group and they go on in different directions, or however. So it's an example which makes clear that, or which brings to reality this combination of individual and common joint learning.
And also the resource of activities, the resource of very content, They are not some outside, let's say they're not just part of outsiders saying something, it is worth to learn, it is not worth to learn. Yeah. They are deciding by themselves, so which makes it quite important in my mind as well.
How to develop a democratic community?
Yeah. I think when we consider this issue, it's quite clear in some points, because we already mentioned that when we talk about schools, they are really complex social structures. They are not homogeneous. They are open for, in, let's say, idealistic terms, they are open for everybody to be inside. So in this case, to be able to build a democratic community, we should be open to see the diverse needs of students, or let's say children. The term students makes me crazy sometimes, that's why I'm correcting myself, and in this case, we should be able to create some mechanisms that tries to observe children in their varying needs, so, and try to, let's say, provide some opportunities to help these needs. And this is one very basic part of democratic schools, in my opinion. And also, in the end of the day, I think democratic schools are to develop autonomy in students, in teachers, and in communities. Because, first of all, I would like to stress that when we talk about autonomy, generally we sometimes assume that it is something given from somebody to another person. But it doesn't work like that in my mind. Autonomy is something built through the life in the school. If they do something, if they experience something, in the end of these experiences, they develop something cognitively, emotionally, socially, and this is the part of life of school. And democratic schools are to develop autonomy in children, or not just children as well, for teachers.
Everyone.
Yeah, in adults, yeah, also. So it's important. So it's also a part of developing a democratic community in my mind. We cannot transfer it, we should build it by organizing life in the school. And maybe we can talk about the structuring committees, because it's a way to create structures, mechanisms in the schools. Maybe we can share some examples.
I had the chance to join a meeting of the juridical committee, and it was very interesting to me to see that it was somehow organized like a court, and someone had broken a rule. And so there was a group of young children sitting there, and there was one adult really acting as a facilitator. She was not taking any influence on what was going on, except making sure that every of the children understood what was said before. So that was her job, nothing else, and she really did it that way. That was, to me, that was a fascinating example.
So assigning role to individuals and letting children to take the responsibility of the environment, yeah, that's quite a good example in my mind as well. And also, to be able to create a democratic community in a democratic school, I think it's important to involve the community itself, the neighborhood in which the school takes place, maybe sometimes inviting people from outside to the school, maybe sometimes taking people in the schools to outside of the school building or garden. It's important because we may transfer the experiences outside school into inside, or maybe we can support children to learn about the social codes that are taking place in our communities. Because in the end, we are, as we said already, we are aiming to raise citizens or individuals who are aware of the social structure in which they are living. So it's important to let them to have some experiences outside the school building. So this is an important part of, I guess, a democratic community.
Yeah, maybe another example for that?
Yeah, please.
They were not explicitly democratic schools, they were state schools, but they were on the way of democratization, and we asked them to include one person from outside of school into the steering group for school development. And some of them had wonderful ideas, someone from the museum around the corner. One school thought about inviting the mayor, maybe also of strategic reasons. And some had really difficult to find someone who they could include in the steering group. But in general, I would say it's a good example that the connection between the school and the environment or the community around the school is much more intensified.
And also, in the end of the day, they are also individuals. So
Yeah.
some of these children might be the mayor in the future. So letting them to be observing these environments is important. And also, I would like to stress a last point regarding this question. When we talk about participation in school environments, sometimes it's difficult to, let's say, describe what's participation. Maybe we can give some examples of modes of participation in school settings. For instance, for me, if there's a group of children who really makes a decision in the school, it's kind of participation in my mind. Or let's say there are a group of children, for instance, as in the case of the school council issue, as I gave an example, they solved a problem by themselves. It's a participation. Or if they could set an agenda, we should discuss this topic in the school council next week, let's say. It's a participation. Or when they take some initiative, when they propose something new, when they reject something, if there's something that are proposed by a teacher and they say, no, it doesn't work for us, it's also a participation. So there are different levels of participation dimensions, and we can imagine participation like this, in my opinion. And also, feedbacks are also quite important. Feedbacks from students to teacher, teacher to student, parents to teacher, students to parents. These are important because it means that we are observing each other, we are hearing each other, and we are talking with each other. We are having a dialogical relationship. So these types of modes of participation might be kept in mind to, let's say, visualize the participation, how it can take place in democratic schools.
Yeah. I just have another example for that in mind from Iceland. It's not an explicit democratic school, but it's a school with a strong democratic tradition. And the students, some students had the idea, we don't have enough space and time to talk about social things. So we need a new subject in the plan for the next school year. And they brought it to the students' council, and then they brought it to the school council. And when I was there, they said, the vice principal said, yes, they asked for that, and we will give it, but we didn't tell them until now. But next school year, there will be a new subject in the plan of the week. So that's influence of students in school.
Flexible
and
curriculum.
That's participation.
Yeah, that's a flexible curriculum. That's participation. This is a quite nice example in my mind. Thank you for that.
For now, you might think that democratic schools are like perfect or something, but we don't think that, and they are not perfect at all. So there are some specific challenges for democratic schools. Therefore, for example, it is a big discussion about the elitist and exclusive student bodies of some democratic schools. And it's more or less about over-representation of some groups of society in specific democratic schools. For example, there was a wave of establishing democratic schools called like the second wave. I mean, you said that. And they are established in the idea of building a little island inside of regular schools. So therefore, they challenged these problems since ever. And other schools are facing these problems because of some demographic issues in the part of the country they're in and something like that. And there are also some challenges about exclusive students' bodies because of the parents. They're bringing some biases to the table. So for example, I witnessed some parents who are more engaged or more interested in the education of their children. They are more likely to send their children to like special schools or more good schools, therefore private schools and democratic schools and so on. But you already told me that there is another bias from parents who have children with disabilities, right?
Yeah, some of them are fearful about democratic schools because they have the fear that their children could get lost. Because you have the big freedom in democratic schools and you have not safe structures for their child. So they think, oh no, that's not a good solution or that's not a good perspective. And they ignore, or maybe they don't see that, of course, a democratic school is able to put structures around one child. And they could start with a group of children which are close to that child, and they could think together about how can we do it that this is a good situation for this child.
Yeah.
So it's not about of being somewhere and get lost.
Yeah, yeah.
But also there are some other aspects as well, the alternative ways of seeing democratic schools. Because I remember I read some, and also I observed some approach to democratic schools saying that they are places for such kind of children, you know, who has some difficulties in learning environments. So the democratic schools could be some like islands that they can feel secure, that they can feel comfortable. So there are different ways of seeing democratic schools, I guess. In some cases they are for everybody, I guess. Maybe in some cases they are for some specific groups of people. Maybe we can discuss this as well.
Yeah, it's depending on the rigidity of the state school system. So if there is a high rigidity and state schools have big problems with a lot of students or a lot of children, of course there will be a high percentage of children in democratic schools which have been in state schools and they changed to democratic schools. Mm-hmm. And that's like it is.
And I think
but
that
it could be a problem.
Could be a problem.
Yeah.
And I think there's also another problem, like linked to the problem of the exclusive student body, and that's a problem of sensitivity or challenging the different cultural backgrounds, especially if these backgrounds are linked to ways of communication, because communication is so important for democratic schools. It takes a really big part of the backbone of the democratic schools, and there are some rules in communication that are different in different cultures. For example, I have an example from Germany. In the German language, it's quite disrespectful if you interrupt some person. And that's simply because in the German sentence, important words like the verb come at the end of the sentence. So it's important to understand each other, to hear the end of the sentence. And therefore, it's common or normal to don't interrupt people, and that's the right way of a democratic discussion and something like that.
If you don't do.
Yeah, and if you don't do, you get very, very judged. Yeah. But interestingly, there are many other languages where that is not the case. Though the sentences are built different, and therefore it is not disrespectful to skip the end of the sentence and jump right through the important subject. And that's one example for how the way of communication interferes with the way of understanding how the good democracy works. And if we want to not just push the dominant culture of communication, we have to be culture sensitive about this. And I think it's a bigger problem, maybe a bigger problem for democratic schools than for regular schools, because they don't communicate that much.
Everyone has to shut up
yes.
when the teacher speaks.
So, yes.
No problem.
Yes. There's another challenge to the starting question, what challenges are special for democratic schools? And I think it's the role of adults in democratic schools. And there are some ways of democratic schools, they are like saying the teachers should lie back, they should wait until the students came up with some idea, I want to thought about this, I want to learn about that. So there are some where it's more interactive between adults and children to what's to learn. And we don't want to judge. We agreed we want to judge on that that's the right way, that's the wrong way. We just want to highlight their different ways of dealing with it. But we want to talk about the connection of that with the community outside of school. So for example, with the parents. And I remember you mentioned something earlier. Maybe you can explain that again.
I think it's a changing situation in democratic schools, because there are some times in which these schools really benefit from the experiences of parents. They transfer their prior, let's say, knowledge to the school settings, maybe their expertise. They may sometimes support students to find their interest, maybe what they want to learn indeed. They may support schools in these aspects. But from another case in Turkey, there was a school established by a group of parents. It was a cooperative school, just to open their school in a democratic, let's say, governance issues. They were thinking about these things. It should be a democratic one. Children should be able to participate in the decisions made in the school. So as they established the school themselves, they saw themselves as the boss in this setting. So they had the right to decide on the instruction, the content, sometimes the processes in the schools. So they turned to be the bossy parents, which caused some problems in this setting, because they thought they knew better than the teachers. And we should keep in mind that teachers are professionals who received an education, or let's say some trainings regarding these issues, and they know these things, hopefully. In some cases, maybe they don't, but still, they are professionals doing this job. So we should be respectful toward them in some cases. If we are trying to create a democratic community in schools, we should be careful for our relationship regarding all of the members, not just for the good of children, but it should be regarding the other adults, maybe the teachers, maybe the other school staff. So we should be careful in our relationships in these aspects as well.
Sure. In other words, it's not a dialogic relation just between students and teachers, or children and teachers. Then with all adults and children, it should be a dialogic way. Yeah.
And it could be a special challenge if there are parents who are also teachers working elsewhere. Because then they are also professionals.
Yeah, bossy professionals.
Bossy professionals.
You knew it better, yeah. I want to highlight one last aspect that's challenging for democratic schools, and I think that is the neoliberalist or the critic of democratic schools are being more leaning into neoliberalism and individualization. And first, neoliberalism is the dominant process or view of education at the moment in the most democracies. I got it. And, and I want to strengthen that this kind of view, neoliberal view of education, is interfering with the idea of inclusion. Because the first problem is then the goal is not to have more participants inside school and in all process. The goal is to be more productive as a student, and then as an employee, and as after school.
So as a startup.
As a startup or something like
whatever.
that, yeah. And it's therefore mistaken the idea of personalized learning that democratic schools established in the first place. And the second problem is that there is no need for inclusion other than in the way we think democratic schools. In a neoliberal way, it's just need for inclusion when you make the team more productive, when we can use your human resource. And therefore you get included if you make the team more creative, get more productive, but not because it's your human right or something like that. So.
And I think we can give an example by a term used especially in USA context, I guess, school choice. When we talk about school choice term, it's something in my mind referring to the alternative ways of seeing education, which is stratified. There are some good schools, bad schools, and you have the right to choose among them, which, let's say, destroy the idea of establishing schools that serve for democracy instead of, let's say, public or let's say communal good. It is just for some parents and for some children. It's just for them. It's their right. They have the right to go to good schools, and it's it. And also, I heard another concept related to democratic education. There was an article describing different types of conceptions regarding democratic education, and there was elitist democratic education, which refers to the schools that are to develop democratic manners for children who are from high socioeconomic level status families. So it's just for them, elitist democratic schools. So we have different types of understanding regarding this issue, I guess.
So the last question we wanted to force is, what can we do then? There are so many challenges for democratic schools. There are so many like perfect ideas and something like that. And one might think, okay, that's nice, but I can do that. And I think the key is to not get overwhelmed with this many ideas that seem to be perfect, because no democratic school was established overnight. They were and they still are made and built, and they are changed every day. And I think a key aspect to empower our listeners is to understand democracy is not just an ideal we have to get through. It's more or less like understand as a constant process for democratization with the goal of inclusion, more participation, and to question like the common ways and what is normal or what's not normal.
Let me give an example.
Yes.
There was a reading describing democratic, or let's say resembling democratic education to the relationship of three neighbors.
Yes.
I mean, there are some times that you have conflict with your neighbor.
Yeah.
And you face with this person to discuss this issue. Sometimes you maybe have a harsh speaking with each other. And in the end, you solve this problem. Democracy is our everyday life. It's not something over the clothes.
No.
It's here.
Yeah.
It's between us.
Yes.
So it's important to consider this issue in this perspective, I guess.
And it's not a stage you can reach one day and then you have it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everyone can start this process. I think every student, every teacher, it's possible. And I think maybe it's a good way of understanding. You could start with a little problem your regular school faces already, or you and your colleagues are talking about it. That's annoying. Let's change that. Maybe you could start with that, because if you have to find a solution anyway, you could find a democratic solution. So maybe in watching this video, you get some ideas for problems you already have, and maybe you propose to your and your colleagues like, maybe we could do a democratic solution for that. And therefore, or if you have no idea, you could, for example, start with the index for inclusion you mentioned earlier. What's that again?
Yeah, that's a material existing for 20 years already. And it contains hundreds, and the last editions, thousands of questions. And the idea is, and there is not a single answer.
Yeah.
So you have more questions, and the idea is to enrich the common reflection about what's happening in the school, or in the kindergarten, or in the church, or in the wherever.
Yeah.
In any situation. And the idea is to enrich that common reflection, enrich the dialogue about that, and you can be sure that you find your own good solution for that.
Yeah.
And or maybe not a solution, but a good, not too stressful next step.
Yes, a starting point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not like the overwhelming point, but the one like that's not good, but I could tackle it.
Yeah. And because one of the main concepts of the Index for Inclusion is reducing barriers for participation and learning. So it's so close, again, inclusion and democracy brought together, linked together.
Sure. So in conclusion, we see there are many, many starting points, and sadly there's no exemplary way to get there, but there are many starting points.
Or maybe that's a good thing.
Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's inclusive and democratic way. Yes, and that's good, because you have to find a solution that fits your environment, fits your people, your students anyway. But nevertheless, there are some systematic ways of getting there, how to become or to start process. So there are some other videos about developing schools and evolving as a teacher. And I think there's one video about continuous personal development, if you want to start like a little team to develop as teachers. Or there's a video, I think you are in there, it's about school administration, and there will be also a video about implementing policies. And you can watch them and get another ideas how to start with a democratic school. So Dran, in your opinion, what's the backbone of democratic schools?
Okay, not the cafeteria.
Yes.
Because I thought about it, the cafeteria is a perfect answer. Because if the students run the cafeteria and they have to make a menu and they have to shop and have to run a budget and have to sell, it's like perfect for a whole learning system. But put that aside, okay? I'll tell you our experience from the democratic school in Hadera. Okay? Like when the school was established, there was no clear educational program. Like we came with a stomachache and ideas. But it was clear from the beginning there will be no obligation that the students will have to stand and do, but everything is going to be free. They can choose whatever they want to do. And then, there was some lessons that we offered, but it was not obligatory, compulsory to take them. And there was a yard with a football field and a basketball court, and there were centers like art center. They could come and draw, and they could go and do some internship, like with a blacksmith or a hairstyler. But then we asked ourselves, okay, so we offer them all this, but what do we do? And then we said, okay, we'll help them obtain the tools they need to do whatever they want to do. And there was the power relation really went down because we were not in charge of lessons that are part of a compulsory program. We did not take care of the discipline, but there was a discipline committee. So what do we do? And then it started coming. Like let's say a 5-year-old comes and says, my friend, he all the time wants to decide what we're playing. And he's calling me bad names. And I'm not sure I want to be his friend. And like let's say an 8-year-old will come and say, my parents told me that it's very important to learn language and math and English. And if I don't go to those lessons, they will take me out of school. I don't want to go there. And let's say a 12-year-old will come and say, I have a boyfriend and he wants us to kiss, and I don't know if I want to kiss. I'm not sure. And it's possible because, there's we were coming closer. And a high school kid would say, I really like computers and I'm good in computers and my father's good in computers, but I started playing guitar and maybe I will be a musician, not a computer man, And then we understood that it's not just do whatever you want. It's your choice, choose. You're free, you're free, you're free. It's not so simple to understand what I want to do. There's a whole big range of questions there. And that's where we are really needed. That's the place we are needed. Because before you understand what you want to do and enjoy it, you have to build an inner, inside yourself, an understanding of what your values are. Not moral values, values in what is important for me when I make decisions, when I decide what are the things that are most important for me, friendship or to play whatever I want to play. Be connected to the boyfriend because I like him, or to say, okay, I don't want to kiss, and if I'll part, I'll part. What is the most important thing to me? And to see, to build a point of view, my point of view, personal, towards what's around us. A point of view that takes into consideration my parents, my culture, my neighborhood, what's popular with my friends. Like, it's this whole big inner thing that has to be built. And it's not easy to build it. And that's where mentoring came in. And this is why mentoring started to be the most essential part of our doing, okay? Just one more thing, okay? This is why it became the backbone of our pedagogical, or whatever you say, doing. But then there was another thing in mentoring. Mentoring was one of the best ways to imply human rights. Because if you want to imply human rights, and the mentoring is the best place where we say, whatever you think is important you think. Whatever you have to say, I really want to listen to it. I really want to listen, I really want to see. And I want to see and listen not to what you say or do, but what's behind it, what's under it. I really want to make your existence present. And I want you to be safe. I want you to feel sure. I want you to be open. That's human rights. That's children's rights. And this is also in mentoring. And this is why mentoring, in my opinion, is the backbone of democratic education.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.